I was working at the bedside for all these years, and I would watch as EKGs are being done. I would ask myself, really, is this really as good as it gets? Almost 2 million EKGs are done every day throughout the world. So massive volume.
How is that going to save me money or make me more money? That leap from finding a clinical problem to finding an economical rationale behind it, I think is so difficult.
Welcome back to Stories in Life Sciences. I'm Christopher Wilson. Today I've got the co-founders of Crimson Scientific. This is one of my favorite origin stories. Day one of healthcare ventures class at MIT, Dr. Michael Cetta, a veteran ED physician, stands up and says he's going to modernize the EKG. Mark Zachary, a young biomedical engineer, walks across the room and shakes his hand. Crimson Scientific was born. A clinician who lived the problem, an engineer who can solve it. Get different backgrounds in the same room, that's when real problems get solved. The 12-lead EKG hasn't changed in 50 years. Because the disposable pads cost pennies, nobody could crack the economics. Crimson did. A reusable single-piece device, no adhesives, no skin prep, at less cost per use. These two validated obsessively. Hundreds of customer calls before building anything and still getting weekly feedback from frontline clinicians. MHub backed, FDA exempt, currently raising. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show today. I got Dr. Cetta and Mark Zachary on here from Crimson Scientific on Stories in Life Sciences podcast. And just to start off, I'll have you two kind of take it and introduce yourselves and your background and your role at Crimson Scientific. We'll go ahead and start with Mark.
My background is in biomedical engineering and computer science. That's what I studied in undergrad. I went to the University of Minnesota. Soon after, I joined Boston Scientific. I got very lucky. It was during the whole digital health boom with COVID happening in the background. Everybody was really interested in AI tools, and I joined a small exploratory R&D team in the urology division. What we were working on is, can we automate image interpretation when it comes to kidney stone surgery? We were building algorithms that can use a monocular camera to estimate the size of a kidney stone while the surgeon is actually doing the operation. Found a lot of success in that, led me to join another division. I was working across two divisions and worked in peripheral interventions where I was working on IVUS, the intravascular ultrasound. Same principles of using computer vision to automate interpretation of intravascular ultrasound. You get these, 2,000 frames of data, and it's very hard for a doctor to look at this much data. And so with AI, we were building tools that can automatically tell you, okay, you have a acute type of thrombus or subacute or chronic thrombus. It wasn't necessarily diagnosing anything, but it was helping physicians make their calls a lot quicker. Fell in love with that space, although the pace of big med device companies is pretty slow.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
And I was, especially when you're young and you're so excited to build things quickly and you have to wait on, the sales and marketing to approve what you think should happen. It was a little bit frustrating, and I ended up working at the Mayo Clinic for about a year before I went to grad school. So I transitioned into that role. And at the Mayo Clinic, I was working in the it's called the FAST Enterprise AI team. And what it was just simply 6 guys building statistical and machine learning models on Mayo Clinic data. And what we were trying to do is, again, automate interpretation of different modalities of imaging. So we were working on X-ray, CTs, MRI scans, and building predictive models using them. That was much faster. Mayo had a pipeline where they had, the medical students were labeling the data, so we had accessibility to that. They're a hospital, so they had the data already, and it's a big research facility, so we can quickly iterate and deploy AIs. A year later, I got into MIT for their joint MS MBA program, where you get an MS in electrical engineering, computer science, and an MBA all in 2 years. It's called the LGO, or Leaders for Global Operations. That was an amazing opportunity to learn about, the business world more, which I knew nothing about, and how I can take that knowledge and sort of scale medical device companies and build them. And, what are other things I didn't consider beyond the clinical problem and the tech, which that's what I was hyper focused on. And that's what led me to, Mike, who's now like one of my best friends.
Oh, shucks.
I'll let him.
That's
Tell
what
a
you want to
story.
hear from founders. I like best friends.
Yeah. No, we have a really unique friendship, and it really does feel like a family. And I'm just want to give a shout out to him. He's an incredible person. So I'll let him introduce himself.
All right. My story is a little bit more circuitous. I studied engineering as an undergrad, found my way to medical school instead of practicing engineering, found my way to medical school. Ended up focusing on emergency medicine. And I practiced emergency medicine for quite a while. I started as a clinician at the bedside, and then as a clinical leader, I chaired several departments, and I joined a growing group in Maryland, and we became a very big group in Maryland and expanded outside of Maryland, and I was a managing partner of that group. So I gained a lot of experience, not only as a clinician, but as a clinical leader, but also as a business leader, growing a sizable ER group. And then in 2016, we sold that group into a private equity roll-up to form what's today the second largest ER group in the country, called U.S. Acute Care Solutions. And I was an executive there until I started Crimson Scientific. So for about 10 years, I was an executive there. And that was a fantastic time in my life. And a board observer in a very large $2 billion private equity-backed company, 7,000 docs, you get the stories. It's just a kind of experience some people can only pray for. It was with that, in all that path that I just described, I came across the problem that Mark and I are determined to fix. And the problem I want to fix, that we want to fix, is to fix this process of capturing EKGs. And if any of your listeners know what an EKG is, most of them do, I hope. EKGs are the gold standard tests that we use to evaluate cardiovascular disease. It's how we diagnose heart attacks, arrhythmias, on and on. And as an ER doc, you use them all the time. It's perhaps one of the most commonly used diagnostic tools, EKGs are. I was working at the bedside for all these years, and I would watch as EKGs are being done. I would ask myself, really, is this really as good as it gets? The process of placing stickers on the skin, sometimes having to shave the skin and remove oils and lotions. And then once you get all the stickers in place, and you hope you get the location right, that's not a foregone conclusion because people can put them anywhere they want. Once you get them on, then you attach these 10 wires, and you hope you get the order of those wires right. We don't always do that. And it just seemed like, wow, is this really, in 21st century, is this as good as it gets? So with that, I always kind of focused on that for a while, even while I was still doing my day job and driving carpool. And then my story goes, about 2 years ago, I found myself in Cambridge. Mark leaked it a moment ago that we met at MIT. I spent a year taking classes at Harvard and MIT, not because I got in as a smart guy, because my wife got in as a fellow. So I rode her coattails into that esteemed environment. And I took a business school class at Sloan, which is MIT's business school class on healthcare ventures. The first day of class, the professor says, anyone have any business ideas? And I stood up and said, yeah, well, we're going to modernize the EKG, and here's how I'm going to do it. And I could see Mark from across the room look at me. We had never met to that point. He went through the crowd, said, I'm interested. We shook hands, and that was really the beginning of what's now been, over a 2-year friendship, more like a 3-year friendship. And we've come a long way, and we'll get into it on the podcast, kind of how far we have come, but that was the start of it. We won a couple big pitch events, got accepted into M-Hub, which is the accelerator here in Chicago where we're based, and Crimson's been running out of M-Hub now for the last year. And that's how we got to where we are. And there's a lot more to the story, more current, but that's where we are as of today.
That is not your everyday founder story connection, like in a class like that. But I like that. I enjoy that. I appreciate you giving the backstory on that too. Just a little more clarification. I know I've been in the ED and I've seen a lot of like EKGs put on, but can you kind of just go through that a little bit more and what you saw as the main problem? I know just like how that process goes. And I know we've talked about it too. It's just, and the fact that it hasn't changed since it started.
Yeah. Well, my focus was, I think most people watching an EKG being done, if they haven't seen it being done, would probably ask themselves, really? Is this 21st century technology? And I touched on it a moment ago, but I would see it day in and day out. I'd be walking into the room, you have a critical patient, they're sweaty because they're having a heart attack, perhaps, at least you think they are, and we're trying to get an EKG, and we just can't get these stickers. The normal process for an EKG is we put 10 electrodes on your body, 1 on each limb, that gives you 4, and then 6 across the chest. Those are called the precordial leads. And they got to stick to the body, of course. And if people are hairy, or if they're sweaty, or they're moving, or they have lotion, it makes that whole process challenging. And very often you find nurses having to sit there and hold the electrodes in place, or use razors to remove skin, or take alcohol to remove the oils, or use sandbags to keep them in place. All this kind of just, just trying to make it work. Then you get to the wires. You attach these wires in the correct order. It's not arbitrary where one wire gets connected to each one of these 10 electrodes, and the order is very specific. And very often, in the haste of the moment, we get them reversed. So that kind of stuff happens almost every day. And I would just ask myself, is this really as good as it gets? Can't we do something better? And so I started thinking about it. Any good entrepreneur, and Chris, you know this as well as anybody, any good entrepreneur should start by validating that the problem they think they've identified is indeed a problem that other people agree with. And so I was determined not to make the mistake of some ambitious entrepreneurs who just kind of forge ahead trying to find a solution to a problem they think they identified. So Mark and I spent the better part of 6 months doing hundreds and hundreds of phone calls with frontline healthcare workers, nurses, techs, doctors, economic buyers, and all sorts of verticals, acute care, post-acute care, ambulatory care, EMS, trying to understand, do you indeed agree that this is a problem? And sure enough, time and time and time again. And we continue to do customer validation now, even today. We'll do calls almost every week with people on the front line just to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. Now it's more around identifying our solution and getting feedback on our solution. But initially, we were just trying to do what any good entrepreneur should do, and that is make sure that the problem you want to solve is indeed a problem other people recognize. So we did a lot of that.
Maybe to summarize that a little bit, the way we talk about the problem is there's 3 issues with the current process. It's slow. It takes, on average 10 minutes to apply these 10 individual stickers, making sure that they land in the right spot. That's a long time. Somebody's having a heart attack, every minute counts. And then the second problem, like I said, it's a manual process of locating those electrodes. And so with that comes a lot of human error. It's highly inaccurate. And you'd be surprised to learn that the sensitivity of a 12-lead EKG is quite low. It's about 35 to 40%. It's highly specific, but it's not very sensitive. Part of the reason it's not very sensitive is because these operators, in the haste of the moment, because they value getting it fast, is they apply these electrodes in all different places, and oftentimes it's wrong. The precordial leads need to go on specific locations on the torso, but oftentimes they don't actually land in the position they're supposed to. And then when a physician sees it, they don't know if the result is because of a cardiac condition or because the electrodes are just misplaced. That's our second problem, is it's a highly error-prone process. And then the third one is the complexity that comes from this process. It requires a lot of training so that you can ensure that you know how to connect every wire to every electrode or where the electrodes need to land. And some markets don't have the necessary tools to train their staff properly. And you end up with markets like post-acute, for example, that barely, 90% of post-acute facilities don't have on-site EKGs. We talked to probably 200 plus customers, and we boiled it down to 3 issues: slow, inaccurate, and complex.
Yeah, so it's clear that there's a problem, and it sounds like you all did a lot of validation early on, which is, I feel like, key, which a lot of people always don't. But now, then, how did you come to the point of having your solution? How are you solving that problem at Crimson?
That had a lot of input from those same people that complained about the problem. And we're still talking to those same people and trying to validate our solution. Currently, we have our alpha prototype, which captures the value propositions that we just mentioned. We want to make it faster, more accurate, and less complex. It's still not finalized. We're gearing up to that. We hope to commercialize by next year. The process was really going back to those customers and asking them, okay, here is where we think we heard you talk about these issues. You have to take the macro level issues, which is it's slow, and then you need to dumb it down to understand why is it slow. Well, okay, it's 1, the adhesives. So can we remove the adhesive piece? Can we build something that's non-adhesive? 2, there's a lot of wires. Having to untangle all those wires takes time. Can we remove the necessity of attaching individual wires to the electrodes? And so that our solution was, okay, well, what if you made a single piece form factor that already integrates all the electrodes and all the wires together? So you're slowly trying to unpack what makes it slow, what makes it inaccurate, and what makes it complex. And we took individual elements and converted those to design inputs that now became our solution. And maybe, Mike, you can give an overview of what our solution is right now.
So we've been through several iterations. I think that I've heard some stories in the past that the guy who invented the Dyson vacuum had something like 5,000 iterations before he landed on
That's
the one that's,
wild.
I don't know if that's true or not. But we've been through many. It's not quite 5,000. But our goal was to make a device that lays on a patient's chest, doesn't go around the chest, just lays on the front of the chest, conforms to the chest wall, man or woman, doesn't matter. We also wanted a device that would allow the woman to keep a bra on. We don't want to disrobe patients. We also wanted, as Mark said, to avoid adhesives and to pre-wire it. So we went through a few different iterations of that. We brought an early prototype to a hospital, showed to the nurses and techs. They say it's good, but, and we go back to the drawing board, iterate again, did that again, did that again, did that a few times. So the alpha prototype that Mark is alluding to, that I mentioned earlier, is this device that is think of like an octopus arm slightly grabbing you. And it does that. It hugs the patient's chest wall and it spans across the bra. It puts the 6 precordial leads in the appropriate position. So the position is always the same. There's no variability. The underside of this device has the electrodes pre-embedded that are dry electrodes. So they don't require adhesive. In fact, they work just fine with sweat or oil or hair. You can just put it on top. It works just fine. So you don't need to prepare the skin. And then our device connects directly with the existing EKG machine. We didn't want to go after and try to compete with, say, GE and Philips who are making these $30,000 EKG machines. We simply wanted to improve this process of lead placement and eliminate the wires. And that's what our device does. And it works and plays very nicely with the existing EKG machine. So with our device, we can get the time to capture. We can cut the time to capture in half, remove the human errors with variable lead placement, wires being mixed up, and vastly simplify the process. So eliminate the need for all this ongoing competency and training, which the gold standard process currently depends on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that I feel like another key part of it that you mentioned too, the ease of entry into the acute care environment, that you're not trying to disrupt or displace those machines within the hospital, that yours has the ability to, it's just an automatic, I assume that it sends wirelessly, like the signal that
it's funny you should say that. We can talk about it as it gets into the nitty gritty, but we deliberately chose not to be wireless for a couple of reasons. Okay. One is wireless connectivity in a healthcare setting is fraught with challenges. Now you have cyber issues. Is it going to be Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, more than, there's other platforms. None of this stuff is highly dependable. So we want something that is absolutely dependable and reliable. Furthermore, we wanted the bill of materials to be as minimal as possible, because one thing that Mark didn't mention is our device can be acquired at the same unit economics as hospitals currently spend on disposable electrodes. Okay. And you're asking yourself, how is that even possible? So a current EKG, 10 electrodes, as I mentioned, each of those electrodes costs about 15 to 20 cents each. Times 10, it's about $1.50 to $2 of disposable electrodes when you do an EKG. So our device, because it's reusable, our device will last 500 uses, and we could sell it for $750, $1.50 per EKG. So the unit economics are the same as disposable electrodes, but you get a much faster, much more accurate, vastly simplified solution instead.
I was just going to say, my this is just a theory, but my theory around why people haven't really modernized the current process is because these disposable electrodes are so cheap.
Yeah.
No one has figured out a business model or a unit economics that can compete with, the 3Ms of the world. They're printing millions and millions of these electrodes. They make a pack of 10 for maybe 10 cents. And so it's very, very cheap. I think the advantage that we have right now is there's been a lot of advancements in dry electrode technology, reusable dry electrode technology, without adhesives, without gel, and get proper coupling of the electrode to the skin and still get the same signal the next time you use it. And that's really the key of why now we're able to do it. I think part of it is the technology, part of it is also the business model. I think here it's unique.
Yeah, no, that makes more sense. When I was first talking to Dr. Cetta, that was my question. Like, I was no one done anything with this, but with the business economics of it, such an important piece of it. But it sounds like you all are really digging into that aspect of it and solving that part of it, which is a super important part. I wish when I was at Smith and Nephew, when we launched our video arthroscopes, that we wouldn't have gone wireless. So I'm glad that you all have decided to go hardwire, because that's just a way better even though it sounds like in some ways with technology, it's going backwards, but in the hospital environment, well, yeah, hardwiring, that's a good call. That's the way, that's the way to go.
It's probably no time on this podcast to go into it, but briefly, I'll whet your appetite. If you look back, if you go backwards in Crimson's timeline to maybe a year and a half ago, our vision for the product we were designing was quite different. And at the time, we were touting a wireless solution, among other things that we no longer tout. we migrated quite a bit from that initial thing, but like any good startup, you go where the puck is, and what's the expression? You skate where the puck is. And so we're going where we're confident that we have a lot of ability to take advantage of the market. And wireless was not one of those things that the market was screaming for. Something reliable, economic, was certainly something the market was screaming for.
Yeah, and just you guys have done that since the beginning early on, which I commend you for, but you're still doing it, is getting like having customer connection constantly as you're iterating throughout the process. And like, where did that come from? I mean, is that just something innate that, I mean, I know you have a clinical background and maybe you're used to it. Was that something that you just innately talked about at the beginning, or what?
There's a couple ways to answer that. People who know me, worked alongside me as a clinician, would know one of the things that distinguished me from a lot of other physicians, shall we say, I'm trying to say this nicely, is I don't have much of an ego. And I'm that doc that'll go in the room and say, you know what, to the patient, you know what, we have all our test results. I don't know exactly what's wrong with you. We have a good idea of what's not wrong with you, but we don't know exactly what's going wrong with you, and we need to continue to do some testing or refer you to a specialist. And that kind of transparency as a clinician is not common. Oftentimes clinicians want to give the patient an answer, or patients want an answer, and oftentimes they'll look for an answer that may not be entirely valid, and that was never kind of my style. The point being is, when I started a company, I wanted to make sure that, again, I leaned on the people around me or I could tap into who had expertise that I didn't. I've never started a medical device company. So here I am at school with Mark, and we're being taught that you got to step one. There's a book. Mark knows the book I'm referring to.
I was going to say, my answer to that question is our first days at Crimson was at the Martin Trust Center at MIT.
Yeah.
And the Martin Trust Center, it preaches Bill Ollett's book, Disciplined Entrepreneurship. And their whole thing is, in order to find your proper product market fit, you need to start out with customer discovery, and you need to validate the problems. And there's like a step-by-step way of how you even conduct your interviews. You have a hypothesis that you start out with, you go out and you test it during those interviews, and then you modify it, and you keep doing that over and over again. And so for us, we were very lucky in that the earliest days of Crimson, we had the Martin Trust Center at MIT. We had venture mentoring services also at MIT. They connect you with two people who are very successful founders, and they coach you. And then we also had iCore. So for people who just starting their entrepreneurship journey, the NSF has this program called NSF iCore, a program that basically is intended for people who have technical backgrounds who don't really know much about how to commercialize their products. And so it's kind of like I don't want to be mean, but like a business 101 or like business for dummies kind of. Yeah. But it's actually,
business for dorks is a better way of putting it.
yeah, business for nerds, not dummies.
But it's really like sometimes you might look at the way they describe it and you're like, this is way too much. They're going overboard about how you do these interviews. But you start realizing that at the end of the day, we're all dummies and we're all coming with our own biases. And if you put your ego aside, it's incredibly helpful to have a step-by-step process on how you take your interviews, the hypothesis that you're trying to prove, and slowly build an actual case for your business. And we took advantage of that through the iCore as well. We really had tremendous amount of resources at MIT when we first started that led us to really focus on our customer discovery.
Such an important part of it. That was kind of a similar experience. Like I was at Biodesign. That's kind of what was always preached there was, constant iteration and to be out there. I find oftentimes so in medical device or like biotech, sometimes that's not always being done in that way, where typically in other businesses, I feel like that's a little more of a norm. But I don't know, for some reason, I find it there can be a little more fear in taking that like ugly version of the product out there and showing it to a clinician, but it sounds like there's no fear and there's humility on your all side with taking whatever version of it out there to get feedback. Such a key part of it.
We've been fortunate that because of my background and my stature within, as a clinician, and also Mark's background and his stature as coming from MIT and Boston Scientific and Mayo, we have this, if you will, the Venn diagram doesn't overlap a whole lot. We got a lot of the territory covered between the two of us. And so I don't have any qualms whatsoever going to a nurse and saying, hey, I know this doesn't look all that polished, but can you give me your feedback, please? You may not be as inclined to do that, perhaps, if you're two young founders with an early iteration of your device. There may be some apprehension is kind of think what you're getting at, Chris. I have no apprehension about that. I'm the first one to admit, by the way, as an ER doc, going back 20 years, that the nurses oftentimes have a bigger impact to the patient's outcome than the doctor does, or a tech sometimes. I very much see kind of the hierarchy in a healthcare system be very flat. We just play different roles. There's no superiority and inferiority. It's very flat. The nurse plays a critical role. The techs, the nurses, the administrative staff.
And I just want to say, like, by no means did we not also make mistakes. I think one of the biggest lessons that we've learned is don't jump the gun on your tech. I think when you're first starting a company, everybody's asking about the technology. What are you doing? What are you building? What's your solution to this? Initially, we were kind of under the stress of, okay, we need to do something. We need to build something. But one lesson we learned is we partnered, for example, with an engineering consulting firm before we had a specific requirements for what we're even trying to build. And so now you're wasting a lot of money building something that might not be even validated because you're still doing your customer discovery calls. You're still trying to understand what your user needs and design inputs even need to be. And you're burning money paying somebody else to kind of mess around on your behalf. We made that problem, but quickly realized that, okay, before we really invest money in the technology, we need to have a very clear requirements document. It needs to be validated. If it means, waiting another month or two to have more calls with people and to validate our problems, that's better than spending money building something and realizing that, that's not what the market is asking for.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's a key part. And then your introduction was unique in that you were in a class together. But in terms of your relationship, how do you two delineate those responsibilities? I know your clinical background and engineering, but as a company, like just as two co-founders, like going different directions, how does that work within your company and where you're at now?
Well, we work side by side. Mark's desk is right there, so, which I was kind of by accident. We have a small office, but it ends up being an exceptional way to be highly productive. I oversee kind of more of the business operations around putting together the business model, and Mark is leading the engineering side of things. We work collaboratively on almost everything, so I definitely take a big part in the engineering as well, but I let Mark at the end of the day make the final decisions, and he manages the contractors and so forth. On the business modeling side, or fundraising, for example, or working with investors, advisors, I'd take the lead on all that. It's a little bit more compelling to have kind of the Dr. Cetta thing helps quite a bit. I think also one thing I should say, kind of getting back to the roots of this whole thing, Mark is quite young. He won't tell you how old he is. You can ask him, Chris. Try. He won't answer the question. It took me like a year for him to give me an honest answer. But Mark has one of the most mature, capable ways about him. And I've worked with a lot of people throughout my career, and I'd put Mark's intuition, business acumen up against most people that I've worked with, most everybody I've worked against. So I just I think maybe my intuition was good, or maybe I lucked out, whatever it was. But we really I think the two of us finding each other was a real.
And you mentioned that small office space. That's at M-Hub. You're in Chicago, correct? And how did that transition happen from MIT to there? And just want to speak a little bit to M-Hub, because I know it's such a unique incubator space for medtech companies, and what that's looked like and how that helps you.
M-Hub is very cool. M-Hub is an incubator place in Chicago. It's a big building, 100,000 square foot building that we're sitting in, that's made for hard tech startups. And when I say hard tech, I mean everybody in this building, there's about 200 startups in this building, is building a device. No one's no one's a software startup or a services company. There's no crypto and none of that. Everybody in here building something cool. And I'm looking around right now at all the people here kind of working on
You
it.
anti-crypto?
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. So as part of it, so they do a few number of things. They have this facility where people can nurture their startup, but also they have accelerators in various verticals. One of the verticals is medical device. So a year and a half ago, they harvested applications for medical device companies to be supported by mHub. We applied. There's 350 applicants. We were selected among 7 others. There's 8 teams total. And we moved to Chicago to take full advantage of this 6-month incubator. Or accelerator is the word I should use. They invested in us. They gave us space in the building, surrounded us by other startups, as I mentioned, but also just the resources and people that could help us succeed. With that momentum, we raised $2 million about a year ago from friends and family. We also got investment from Baxter Healthcare and from Endeavor Health, which is a large hospital system here in Chicago. And a lot of it's a big leap for a company like Baxter or for Endeavor to invest in a young startup like us. We had no prototype at the time, but it comes with the territory. If you're an mHub-backed accelerator company, you're going to get some credibility that otherwise companies wouldn't be able to get. I always encourage people, and anytime friends or family or investors come to Chicago, one of the first stops is here at mHub, just to show them the building. It's a very compelling environment. It's probably 100-year-old building with really high ceilings and exposed ductwork and bricks, and it's your classic kind of old factory. The first floor is state-of-the-art prototyping. There's CNCs and 3D printing and injection molding and an electronics lab and a wet lab, and it goes on and on. It's a really compelling place.
I've heard a lot about that. I was looking at what they have. It's got to be an engineer's dream, Mark, like the facility there.
It is. It's a very fun place. I also think we got really lucky with the medtech accelerator that we found and applied to. Just look at the accelerator. Before we even entered, it was a program that was sponsored by GE, Baxter, and Endeavor Health.
Wow.
GE and Baxter both, GE has the biggest market share of 12-lead ECG devices. Baxter just acquired Hillrom or Welch Allen, and so they also have probably the 3rd biggest 12-lead ECG manufacturer. And then Endeavor gives us the clinical access, to deploy or to build a relationship with hopefully what could become an early customer. And so when we first saw that could be incredible for us. Just the credibility you gain by having that backing and the connections we built from those sponsorships. And gives us huge leverage when we have conversations with investors right now. And even in our engineering input, we can have a technical conversation with the guys at Baxter and with the guys at GE, and they've helped us a lot. We got a little lucky. It's not every day that you end up in an accelerator program that is that targeted to the device that you're building. Everything else obviously is also great about mHub, but the medtech accelerator especially opened up huge access for us.
Are you taking on any new investors? I'm listening to what you're saying. It sounds
Funny
like
you should say that, Chris.
It sounds like the perfect storm. All these pieces coming together, and then you got that at the same time. So it's a 6-month window that you have there, and then after that, can you continue?
Yeah. So the accelerator technically ended last May. So here we are 9 months later, we're still here.
Got it.
And as an accelerator company, you get free access, or it's included, I should say. Everything comes with a price. They own a piece of Crimson. We have access to the facility for 2 years.
Okay. And
after that, it's very obtainable, even if we wanted to stay on and just pay rent.
We are raising ground right now, by the way, Chris. Going back.
You did mention that.
I don't know. Maybe you can tell them a little bit about.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we raised $2 million about a year ago. That's enough runway to get us through close to the end of 2026. So we're not desperate, but we're very ambitious on our timeline. It turns out our product is FDA exempt. So we have a much quicker path to commercialization than most medical devices. So our goal is to commercialize by early 2027. Furthermore, we've described our device, and I've made it very clear. It's a sophisticated solution to a simple problem, and our solution is fairly simple. So to build our device, yes, it's very clever, It's very unique. It solves a problem in ways that obviously for 50 years people haven't thought of. However, it is not that difficult to build in the grand scheme of things relative to other complex medical devices. So we have a kind of a quick path through manufacturing and all the verification and validation around that. A quicker path towards commercialization because we're FDA exempt. And because this product is used in such high volumes, almost 2 million EKGs are done every day throughout the world. So massive volume. So it's like the perfect storm. Put this together, we can get into the market quickly, and if things go well, gain a lot of commercialization fairly quickly. So with that, that's a long way of saying if you and I had this podcast 3 months ago, and you had asked about fundraising, at that point we were thinking, well, we'll kick off a seed raise after JP Morgan in January, where we just came back from, and we would kick off a $5 million seed round to fund our manufacturing, commercialization, and pilot testing and all that. We've since realized we're moving faster than we anticipated, and we're more lean with our cash than we probably initially anticipated. So we don't need that size of a round now. So instead, we're going to downsize it. We're calling it an extension raise to buy us another 12 months of runway. Right now we're raising 1.5 million to fund one more year of runway. That'll get us through the end of 27. We'll kick off a seed raise at the beginning of 27 after we've commercialized, after we've finalized our pilot and validated our manufacturing process, done our V&V and so forth. So with that step up in valuation, then we'll raise that larger seed round that'll allow us to scale manufacturing and commercialization at a better valuation for us. So that's kind of our current timeline. So to answer your question, we are actively talking to investors, family offices, angels, small VCs that are interested in participating in this 1.5 extension. And by the way, I think it's a great time to get into Crimson. Our path forward looks very favorable, and it's a time to get in at a very good valuation with us.
Yeah, and on that note, where can people keep track of what you all are up to? What's the best way? Is that I got on your website? Is that there? LinkedIn? Like, what's the best way to keep up with Crimson?
Those are the best two ways right there. Or email me. I'll talk to anybody anytime. But yes, LinkedIn, our website, crimsonscientific.com. We're about to launch a new website, but nonetheless, that's a good place to kind of learn a bit more about the team and what we're up to.
I mean, you hit on it a little bit, Mark, already with one piece of advice that you have for early stage entrepreneurs or starting out in medtech, not building too soon or spending money on that part of it. But anything else that you want to share that you've learned along the way that you feel like you would maybe do differently?
If I had to summarize the learnings for me, definitely gotten a lot better at managing contractors. Make sure you have a very specific ask and a very specific requirement that you want people, especially in engineering, that you want people to help you build. I still believe that building in-house is a more efficient way of doing it. And for what allowed us to move this fast is we are primarily building in-house, but we're relying on contractors to kind of give us more refined versions of it or to take it into manufacturing, because we can't just do everything in-house. Recruit people who are that can build and want to build, and that will save you so much money in the beginning. The second lesson I learned is about the importance of presenting your value proposition in terms of the economics to the customer. I think that comes up in every conversation that we have. Like it's great that you're making it faster, more accurate, and less complex. How is that going to save me money or make me more money? And that leap from finding a clinical problem to finding an economical rationale behind it, I think is so difficult. Not many people are able to articulate it. And we're still working through how to articulate it in a way that's like very direct to a customer. But if I was giving advice to like my future, child about this, I would say spend your time making that leap and thinking about how to rationalize it for a customer. If you can build a model around the health economics of it, and you found a clinical problem and you found a flow of money that supports it, that, makes, I'm going to sound a little bit negative here, but makes the greedy also happy, then you really win.
Yeah, they need to be aligned. I mean, it's just the reality of it. And especially in that acute care environment, you can have an improvement, but if it doesn't make sense economically, but it's not that you guys have looked at that and you're with that goal in mind, you have to hit a certain mark like economically in order for it to be viable at the end, which drives I'm sure some of the engineering choices and the manufacturing, because you have to hit a certain piece along the way. I think it's so key. So thanks for sharing that. Well, I really appreciate your two's time. It was, I learned a lot about MHub, and it was fun to have my first two-person podcast on here to get different. I feel like you guys are a really great example of having backgrounds as co-founders, from the clinical side and just those pieces and working together so well. And I heard some of the parts from Dr. Cetta prior, but your story and just where you're at, I'm like more excited. I know you're solving a problem, but with MHub and where you're at as a company and building some of that stuff in-house and the regulatory pathway, it's like all these pieces together that, I feel like we're going to see this in hospitals not too far away, which is going to be a big improvement from what's happening now. So thank you for all the time and effort that you've put into getting it to where it is now. And I look forward to seeing where it goes next.
Thank you, Chris.
We'll be glad to come back and do another podcast, and we'll have our engineer with us so you can do a three-way podcast.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be fun. Yeah, and it's pretty simple. Like, I'm super visual, but if you've never seen an EKG, just hop on their website. You can watch the video and just see what that looks like visually. It's a real drastic shift from what's happening out there now. And Dr. Cetta knows this all too well. Running around in an ED trying to put those on is a big difference from what they're doing now. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for having us.
You've been listening to Stories in Life Sciences, sponsored by MedAccess AI, where we explore people, ideas, and breakthroughs shaping the future of biotech and healthcare innovation. To learn more, visit medaccessai.org and subscribe on YouTube to watch the full conversations and new episodes as they launch. I'm Christopher Wilson. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep shaping the future one story at a time.